Someone once said that nothing changes unless it has to, and then the change will be an adaptation to its cause. This is the story of pressures, both natural and human, and how they've affected Albion and Bolton, the land that has changed. The area is renowned for its many scenic hills and farms, and has long been known as a fine place for camping and fishing. But another hill is looming on the horizon, the Toronto skyline. The growing metropolis is changing the area from a quiet farm and resort area into a suburban city, complete with heavy traffic, shopping centers, and subdivisions. To fully understand these pressures and adaptations, it is necessary to go back 450 million years, when a sea covered most of eastern North America. The bottom of this sea became the soft shale which now forms the base of the present land of southern Ontario. But the shape of the land depends mostly on the glaciers. 5 major glaciers passed over the area and then melted back to the polar ice caps, each time pushing, mixing, and redistributing the clays, sands, and gravels that make up Albion. The last glacier left a once great river that is now too small for its valley, a wide variation in the quality of farmland, kettle lakes formed by blocks of ice settling into depressions and then melting, several swampy areas or bogs, and deposits of sand and gravel now used in the building and road construction. Its melting allowed plants to grow, and thick pine, then hardwood forests covered the hills and the valleys.
As the glacier retreated further north, the large mammals followed, and as a result, when the large animals moved, so did the pleonatives. In other words, the hunters, the hunting society, followed their game. The projectile points made by the early people, and we're talking 15,000, 12,000 years ago, were fluted. In other words, they were gouged out in the center. Why? Keep in mind the animals that they hunted, the large mastodon, the woolly mammoth. They needed quite a projectile point to kill these particular animals. So the native people fluted their points here. Now what happened was, when this was shot into the animal, the shaft came off and the flesh of the animal pressed against the projectile point. However, a vacuum formed between the fluting and the flesh, allowing the blood to spill out. This, in essence, this projectile point killed the animal by bleeding it to death. Another artifact or flint piece made by the native people, a spear point. Now these items were made by using local chert or flint and putting pressure at one point or another so that pieces or sections would come flying off like so. So the rough state here, which would eventually be shaped into a spear point or projectile point. Now, at this stage, there were 2 main rivers running through the vicinity, we now call the Humber and the Credit, and keep in mind that they were much deeper than they are now, and were used by the native people to migrate or to travel on. Other tribes, other groupings were moving in at the same time, so that you have a lot of ideas, a lot of cultures moving through this particular region here. Eventually, as time went on, and now another few thousand years have elapsed, and another society slowly came into the region we call Albion, and these people here began, they hunted, yes, but they brought in some idea of farming, and they began to make pottery, similar to this particular pot here, very elongated, and these would be used to cook in. They took the elongated pot and put it right in the ashes to cook their foods in. As time went on, this society here gave way to another group that began to farm more and more and more. These were the Iroquois people. As farming reached a climax in this vicinity, they began to grow other things besides corn and eventually, or maize, and eventually tobacco came in, and we see these particular items coming into play. And this is a pipe bowl and a pipe stem connected like so, and native people smoke their tobacco in these pipes. Now this was made in very unique fashion. The native people took green grass, rolled it, and put it inside, or I should say they rolled it, and then put clay around the grass, and when it was baked or put in a fire, you have a hole left where the grass was, and of course the grass burnt away, so that we have a pipe stem and a bowl. This is an adze, and made of stone, and the native people took this and they polished it on another rock until it became smooth. And it's called an adze. It was used to gouge out wood, canoes, and bowls, etc., using the adze. Now, once the Iroquois established themselves in this region, they came in contact with another language group, the Algonquian language group, two particular tribes, the Mississaugas and the Ojibwe. The two clashed, with the result being that the Iroquois were pushed away from this vicinity, and the Ojibwe and the Mississaugas established themselves in this region.
The land containing Albion was purchased from the Mississauga Indians in 1818, surveyed in 1819, and immediately began to fill up with United Empire Loyalists, retiring soldiers, and United Kingdom immigrants. The immigrants' trip was a long one to spend in cramped quarters, and the hazards of storms outside were increased by the possibility of a cholera outbreak inside. Those who made it to Muddy York found that Yonge Street, the only road north, petered out long before it neared Albion, and they had to carry their possessions along the blazed trail for several days before reaching their homesteads.
After they located their property, then they had to build a road to that property. The most used tool was the shovel and the axe. Next, they hitched horses or oxen to this road scraper. They used this to cut down the hills and fill in the valleys. This earth was put on top of the trees that was cut down and laid crossways on the road, which they called a corduroy road. It was drawn by this chain here, with and it went to the double trees or to the yoke on the oxen. The next scraper was this kind here. It is much lighter easier handled, and took more earth at a time. And this one was used a great deal. After the scrapers, then this machine here was brought into the township, and it was the first horse-drawn machine to grade out the ditches and grade up the roads. It required 4 teams to draw it, and they would hitch one team on the side of it, and that team would have to walk more or less sideways to keep this machine from sliding away from its work, so it would push the earth up.
The Crown grant of 50 or 100 acres was conditional upon the settlers' successful clearing and fencing of 5% of it, and the construction of a house and a road at the front. If these were done successfully within 18 months, provision was then made for 4 annual payments for the land to begin on the 5th year of occupancy, with the result that the successful farmer had full ownership after 8 years.
Well, the first thing that the early settlers had to do was clear enough land to grow something to be able to live, to get the trees removed off the stump as quickly as possible. And then they sowed their grain amongst the stumps. And as they cleared the land, that gave them the firewood for the fireplace. And then as time went on, the stumps were removed. And that was a back-breaking job too, I'll assure you, because those stumps had to be all pulled out or dug out and then burned.
The first log houses were the size of the average living room today, and the pioneer family had to carry on all cooking, eating, and sleeping activities in this space. Often the building of a new home was delayed by the necessity of a good barn for animal and crop storage. These were built by the entire community at what was called a barn raising, and a party atmosphere prevailed in the form of competitions between the builders, and a good supply of food and drink was provided. Refined sugar became scarce. The pioneers added it to their list of homemade supplies when the native people taught them how to collect and boil the sap of maple trees down into sugar and syrup. Firewood and maples were both plentiful, and a lot of boiling was required, for it took 40 pots of sap to make 1 pot of syrup. So much sugar was produced in this way that large amounts were exported from Albion.
In front of me here is a platform with hand-hewn timbers, which is believed to be part of the original mill built about 1822 by James Bolton for his brother George Bolton, who purchased 200 acres of land when he came to Albion Township. The mill, which James Bolton Sr. built on this location, was the start of the community, and it was of great significance to the settlers in the area who previously had to carry their wheat for grinding either to Weston or to Newmarket. Flour was shipped by wooden barrels containing 196 pounds. The flour was packed in the wooden barrel. Then, for advertising purposes, a label was affixed, and this is the label for the Pure Gold brand, which was sold by Andrew McFall. For advertising purposes, he put his own picture at the top of the label, and then the name at the bottom. The flour was shipped overseas and to a wide area.
William Lyon Mackenzie represented Albion in the legislature, and he fought single-handedly against the Family Compact, a group of corrupt politicians which had taken control and kept most of the money and big business in Toronto. With the result, the Albion farmer received little for his tax dollar. Mackenzie's attempt to bring about justice got him ejected from the legislature several times, and seeing no other course of action, he led the rebellion of 1837. The rebels were quickly defeated, but even though Mackenzie and several Albion men were pursued into exile in the United States, the rebellion precipitated the joining of Upper and Lower Canada and the defeat of the Family Compact. Despite the setback of the rebellion defeat, Bolton continued to grow around the milling industry. A cooperage was constructed to supply flour barrels, a blacksmith to shoe the horses, and soon a store, a foundry, a post office, and even a high-quality furniture factory, products of which can still be found proudly displayed in many Albion homes. The name Bolton was more than appropriate for the village, for the family produced not only the nucleus of the mill, but the town's lawyers, newspaper publishers, builders, and the first reeve. The Norton Brickyard was busy all summer making bricks which were delivered in the winter and can be seen in most older Bolton area homes. The barber shop was a community center where men could sit and discuss the latest news, weather, politics, and many a business deal for equipment or animals was concluded while having a shave and a haircut for 25 cents.
At that time were 6 hotels and camp up here at the end of this road near where you turn off to go to the station. There were 2,000 men in it. So every payday, 2,000 men came down to the town here and stayed till they were broke. Boat was put on local option. And of course, that dried Bolton up. You can just imagine what that would be. Everything at that time was drew with horse and wagons from the north of here to Toronto. This was the watering spot, like the horses, or whatever you like to call it. And they'd water their horses and get their dinner and get their breakfast and maybe have to stay all night, one thing or another. This was the stop here. And the next one, of course, was down at Fairville, the next one down Thistletown. Now, but this was the one where there's 6 hotels here, and they'd come from way up as far as Alliston, with produce down to Toronto. And, of course, they would get drunk, too. That went along with it, and sleep in the sheds and everything.
Bolton's growth had made its urban problems difficult to deal with at a township level. And so the village was incorporated in 1872 with its own government. The railroad came the same year, and while that seemed to ensure that Bolton would remain strong economically, it was a mixed blessing. Toronto was more accessible now to both merchant and customer, so some businesses were improved by the railroad, but others, unable to compete in the Toronto market, declined.
20 students were enrolled in the village's earliest school, and this all came about really through George Bolton, who was a nephew of the earliest settler, James Bolton, But George Bolton provided land on which he wanted a school built, and this property was located near the intersection of Humberley Road and King Street East. The method of collecting money in those days was far from the way in which they collect it today. It was only the parents of the children attending school that paid, and they had a school tax collector who made his rounds annually, collecting the 25-cent fee per year.
The history of the grain harvest is a familiar one of constantly finding ways to replace man hours with machine hours. The reaping hook quickly gave way to the cradle. This was replaced by the reaper, which was horse-drawn but didn't tie the sheaves, while its replacement, the binder, did. The first threshing method was to hand flail the straw, then winnow the grain in the wind to remove the chaff. This method was replaced by horse-powered and then steam-powered threshers. With the advent of the gas engine and the combine, the entire process was done at once. Where the whole family once spent a week working one stump-filled field, one man could harvest in a day an open field as large as some Crown Grant farms.
It was done, of course, in about February, January and February. It'd be getting pretty nearly ready. Well, as soon as it was ready, deep enough, good enough, the winter was what they wanted, that's when they'd start to cut. And they'd cut away there with those big, long ice saws. And they just saw away like this. No, it must have been murder work, you know. And the snow and the ice and everything, wind and everything, must have been an awful job.
The ice was carefully packed in sawdust in the ice house and was removed a few blocks at a time to preserve food right through the following winter. Bolton grew around its mills, which had to be located in a section of the Humber Valley that lent itself to riverbank construction and mill ponds. This strength, however, often became a weakness. The forests were cleared for farming, with the result that the spring melt was fast and heavy. Floods of varying severity were a hazard each spring. More than once, mill dams were washed out and basements filled with silt. With the need for water power gone due to petroleum and electricity, being near the river is no longer important. So Bolton's urban growth has climbed the surrounding hills, and the city is now an older residential community with Main Street shopping surrounded by a belt of recent subdivisions and plazas. The old geographical and population pressures remain, although each has been altered by modern technology. Albion is being reforested to slow the spring melt, and modern conservation practices have been introduced to reduce the threat of floods. Highways and cars have been improved to the point where Toronto is easily accessible to Albion, and the pressures of the city will enlarge the commuter population still further, but to a limit. Bolton's present sewage disposal facilities will limit it to about 10,000 people, and the current popularity of the estate homes to the north may diminish as the price of gasoline increases. While a direct rail link exists from Bolton to Toronto, a commuter rail service is not yet considered practicable. Farming will remain a part of Albion life, as will the recreation currently provided. A proposed dam north of Bolton would increase the area's recreational and sewage disposal facilities, as well as further diminish the threat of floods. Cuts in provincial spending, however, have pushed its construction out of the foreseeable future, and so Albion's future is largely a continuation of what can be seen in the present, an effort to use the lands left by the glacier to their greatest advantage, while adjusting to the ever greater pressures of the growing city to the south. But changes are not new to Albion, and just as the pioneers made the adjustments necessary to improve their lives, today's population will continue to keep the area a good place to live and grow.